Review guides typically warn against a few obvious spoilers, push you to highlight features the developers consider most significant, and promise many technical issues will be dealt with in a day one patch. In the case of the Resident Evil 4 remake, pre-launch content is restricted to capturing video or images of already marketed content and describing the game in the broadest sense. The good news is these oppressive guidelines have nothing to do with the quality of Resident Evil 4 2023. I think Capcom is assuming, and they're probably right, that most people interested in this remake have never played the original, but enjoyed the recent remakes of Resident Evil 2 and 3. If that applies to you, going in blind is the right approach, and you'll get an entertaining ride with familiar foundations. If, like me, you've played and replayed the original countless times, it still offers a familiar but fresh experience, but the changes to the gameplay and the tone might prove more divisive. Now, story details are mostly off limits, but I will say, despite featuring new voice actors, tweaked dialogue, reworked cutscenes, and stronger horror vibes, the Resident Evil remake remains surprisingly faithful to the original. The narrative is still broken into 3 major acts, each set within a new location that draws on different horror inspirations. The story beats and cliffhangers that connect each chapter remain intact, while the characterization and motivations of the cast are mostly consistent, albeit with some of the wackier elements toned down. The voice actors sound impressively close to the original, both when it comes to accent and delivery, though I did miss the weirdness and action hero movie vibes of the original. But it never feels like there are gaps in the stories, and the pacing is improved, making the Resident Evil 4 remake all the better for it. Another enhanced element, one that goes hand in hand with the updated visuals, is the fantastic environmental storytelling, which leaves the traditional documents you find feeling like incongruous remnants. The original game had no shortage of objects in the environment for Leon to comment on, but the remake does far more, and more organically, with intricately detailed scenes full of little details that tell a mini-story. Leon might have less to say overall, if you exclude his repetitive and annoying combat quips, but the remake still keeps the tension high with plenty of foreshadowing, and even a little more insight into the tragic fate of the local populace. The only downside to the remake when it comes to story is that it's not quite definitive if you consider the PlayStation 2 port of the original, which formed the foundation for all subsequent ports. I'd guess an expansion is probably planned for the future. My feelings on the updated gameplay mechanics are a little more mixed, though most of that stems from having played the original so many times. There are more systems to engage with, and the reworked or streamlined sections are the better for it, but there's a notably different feel to the combat that should please those coming from the RE2 and 3 remakes, but might frustrate fans of the original. Now, there's no denying Resident Evil 4 2005 has floaty animations and wonky half-tank controls by modern standards, but the movement and combat always felt responsive. You could snap off shots at close range, sprint in quickly to melee stunned enemies, and weave between mobs to make some space. The relatively simple environments and limited animations also made for easily readable combat. Enemies were always visible against the backdrop. The dodge and stagger animations were predictable enough for follow-up shots, and the auto-aim felt generous when targeting weak spots. In contrast, Resident Evil 4 2023 uses the sluggish movement and gunplay from the RE2 remake. Despite the opening cinematic highlighting Leon's Special Forces training, he walks slowly, his run is more of a shamble, he takes a second or two to shift between postures like sprinting or aiming, and he's constantly breathing heavily or flexing his joints after the slightest exertion. Sure, it feels more cinematic and grounds him in the environment, but he feels far less responsive to control. This is coupled with that distinctive RE engine shooting that encourages holding your aim for precision shots, but features narrow hitboxes and erratic, sinuous enemy movement, ensuring follow-up shots with any precision weapon are prone to miss. Enemies are also often obscured by darkness, light glare, or just visually dense backdrops, again making it harder to land shots reliably. Obviously, this won't be much of an issue for newcomers, but from the end of the first act, returning players will notice more and more missing, tweaked, or streamlined encounters, coupled with a general increase in the amount of ammunition dropped. The classic encounters that remain, typically those with large creatures and tight spaces, serve to highlight just how sluggish Leon is, though an easy-to-forget knife parry and simple dodge prompts help mitigate this to some degree. Now, all that said, the positives ultimately outweigh the negatives when it comes to gameplay, and Resident Evil 4 2023 has overhauled or simply removed many sequences that were more frustrating than challenging. The gameplay shift also makes Leon feel more vulnerable, combat more desperate, and ramps up the horror element. Now, aside from the combat changes, the original game also introduced several RPG-light elements to the IP, and the remake retains and expands upon them all. Collecting valuables and currency is still essential to buy new weapons, upgrades, and consumables from a mysterious merchant. You'll still use his classic lines at times if you are worried. You've also got the Tetra-style attaché case inventory that can be upgraded and customized further for passive buffs. There are new resources that expand the crafting options way beyond the simple herb mixtures of the original. There are now side quests in almost every major area that lead to unique gear, accessories, and treasures. Admittedly, most side quests don't amount to much more than collectathons, but it makes for a more engaging experience that encourages you to explore each area thoroughly. Another undeniably positive element is the modern quality of life features that have been introduced. Autosaves are more frequent, a simple stealth system can help you thin the horde before a firefight, keeping Ashley safe is easier, and tuned up weapons sell for much more, making it easier to freely upgrade to newer models as they unlock. You've also got multiple difficulty settings, auto-aim assists for those who want or need them, and optional visual modes. The only modern feature that didn't gel with me was the resource sapping knife durability system, though I guess it had to be added in to balance out the knife parry and stealth kill mechanics. Completely remade in the RE engine, Resident Evil 4 2023 looks incredible, well, most of the time. It uses photogrammetry for detailed high-resolution textures, with more geometrically complex environments, but it's not perfect, or at least not in this pre-release build. You'll spot the odd rough patch, and textures can flicker between LOD settings at times, but the bulk of the game features diverse, stunning, and lifelike locations that feel more naturally lit. The layout of many of these areas is also tweaked to provide a better sense of scale and spatial cohesion. The load times are blisteringly fast on next-gen hardware, and there are almost no loading screens once you're in-game. The character models, both human and monster, look great, feel grounded in the environments, and move more naturally. There's great volumetric lighting, coupled with thick weather and smoke effects to create a creepier atmosphere. There are also more physics objects in the environment, which makes combat feel more dynamic and impactful. Enemies stagger as bullets impact into them, and often crash back, shattering props and splattering the environment with gore. The original game already had a great soundscape, but the remake manages to one-up it with meatier combat sounds, densely layered ambience, and immersive directional audio. Sadly, Capcom has once again placed the original soundtrack behind a paywall, but it's not as significant as it was in the RE2 remake. The updated version feels close enough, and still works well in generating a brooding atmosphere or sense of panic once combat starts. Now, aside from the odd texture flickering, the consoles demonstrate variable performance and a lack of a 30 frames per second cap when using resolution mode. If you don't have a VRR display, it's worth accepting a softer image for a more stable 60 frames per second and more responsive handling. On balance, Resident Evil 4 2023 is another impressive remaster from Capcom that straddles the line between faithful and fresh. If you're someone who never got around to playing the original, but enjoyed the RE2 and 3 remakes, you'll find the RE4 remake near perfect. It faithfully recreates and enhances most of the elements that made the original so iconic and memorable, while adding modern controls, quality of life features, and gorgeous visuals. Some of the quirkier characters have been toned down, and a few set pieces had to go in the name of balance and pacing, but it remains a comprehensive remake. If you're a long-time fan, it's still a worthwhile adventure that somehow feels incredibly familiar despite your brain constantly picking out all the differences. You just need to go in prepared for a slight shift in tone and unlearn some old combat habits. If you've got this far, please consider giving the video a like and maybe subscribing to our channel as it helps us grow.